Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got such a great show for you today, including with some exciting guests. We have the former head of the ACLU, Nadine Strawson, here for a really provocative interview about why she doesn't think censorship of Nazi speech is a good idea, someone who is a descendant of Holocaust survivors. So looking forward to that and many other subjects to discuss with you today, Linda.
I'm just happy to be here, and we're matching again.
Yes, we are.
But I love it.
That's that psychic connection we have going on.
Yeah, I feel like you must have missed me while I wasn't here.
Of course.
Robby, what's on your radar?
Happy to tell you. Well, as Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency and the Trump administration more broadly make efforts to reform government and eliminate needless waste, fraud, and abuse, they're coming up against predictably negative press coverage from the mainstream media, which is often sympathetic to government employees and hostile toward efforts to reduce the size and scope of government. That's why you'll often see, read, and hear stories about how some attempt or another by Trump or Elon to change or mandate a new system or eliminate it is resulting in headaches for various people. For instance, you might have read last week that DOGE's efforts to reduce the federal workforce as it pertains to the U.S. park system was creating long lines. The Washington Post complained that the Trump administration had gotten rid of the only locksmith at Yosemite National Park. He was described as the only employee with, quote, institutional knowledge needed to rescue visitors from locked restrooms. Sounds serious, right? Elsewhere, you'll see constant complaints from media that attempts to reduce the federal bureaucracy will hamstring our efforts to fight diseases, or have nuclear safety, or keep airplanes in the sky. But what if there was something not entirely genuine about these difficulties? What if the federal bureaucracy, sensing a threat to its self-preservation, was making things as awful as possible in order to scare the American people into thinking government can only function if it is vast and unaccountable? We actually have a term for this. It's called malicious compliance. It's when someone follows a new rule so closely without applying common sense such that they ultimately work against the rule's stated purpose deliberately. In a recent interview with my colleagues over at Reason Magazine, Randy Barnett, a libertarian-leaning Georgetown law professor, explained exactly what's happening here. Watch this.
This is a standard technique of the bureaucracy. It's called malicious compliance. They take they try to make the most painful cuts possible. It's like when there was a 2-day government shutdown and the federal government ostentatiously closed all the government parks surrounding DC and put chains up so that the media could go and take video of the chains across parks that didn't have to be shut down, as a matter of fact, under that supposed shutdown. This is very standard fight back propaganda from the bureaucracy whose interests are at stake, and from the people who are not in the government, who have been enjoying a very rich lifestyle at government expense. Now, that is not to say, again, that when you're fighting a corruption that's this deep and this impenetrable, that every move that's going to be made is going to be perfect. And we need a free press in order to monitor what government does now, as we actually could have used a free press to monitor what the government was doing during the Biden administration. Unfortunately, we didn't have one. We had a completely state sympathetic press.
And that's the problem, because the media has been so in the tank for Democrats running cover for the Biden administration for years, we can't actually trust them when they say such and such government service is vital and cutting it too much is bad for the American people, because they would say that anyway about every little thing. Why is it the case, for instance, that there's only one park employee with the key to the bathroom? Would a park run by a private organization find itself in such a condition? Malicious compliance, by the way, has been called other things. It was called Washington Monument Syndrome, or Mount Rushmore Syndrome, or Fireman First Syndrome, reflecting the fact that when government bureaucracies are finally forced to make cuts, they start by cutting public-facing services in a maximally painful and visible way in order to sap public enthusiasm for making said cuts. They want you to give in. Don't fall for it. Be somewhat skeptical of media outlets telling you that the sky is falling unless the National Park Service gets each and every last dime it's entitled to, more money than ever. We will never, ever succeed in cutting government that way. Malicious compliance, that's what I think is going on here.
Robby, I think,
Yeah.
I understand the point. I
Yeah.
understand the philosophy and the theory behind it, for sure. I do think it's very important to tell stories about the direct impacts that are happening as a result of the DOGE-driven cuts that we've been talking about ad nauseum for weeks now. But I also think that broad cuts mean broad impacts. And while it's convenient to talk about this one locksmith, and one could question why that article in particular focused on a locksmith, the truth is there are very big service disruptions and other issues and impacts that we are either starting to feel right now or definitely going to feel as this continues. Everything from whether or not your Social Security checks are going to make it to your house, to if there's another health crisis. In fact, we're seeing measles outbreaks in a couple of states right now, whether your public health system will have the experts that are going to keep us safe. So I do think that we don't want to gloss over the impact that doing these, what I think are quite arbitrary cuts, not done with a scalpel, but with a sledgehammer or a, whatever that thing was,
Chainsaw.
A chainsaw, exactly, doing it with a chainsaw.
Well, I don't know.
They're definitely going to be impacted.
Argentina did it with a chainsaw and it worked out pretty well for them. But look, we are a nation in debt. We spend way too much money. There's broad agreement that cuts have to be made. They got to come from somewhere, right? And if I have a criticism of DOGE, it's that some of this stuff, the fraud they're identifying, is piddly. It's a small part of the budget. We're never going to balance the budget by canceling out, semi-random grants and not touching defense spending or entitlement spending, which is the bulk of what the federal government spends. Now, if we fire a massive amount of federal employees, I think that would make something of a dent. But if you fire people and then you end up having to rehire them, well, then you're actually setting yourself back because that's just creating inefficiencies. So I do hope they do more of this. I keep saying this. I'll say it every day. Do this through with congressional oversight, permission, legislation, etc., rather than at random. But we know that whenever they have to adjust their budgets, these organizations, they cancel the customer-facing part first so that you feel the pain and that you go, oh, well, we can't cut our beloved part. Everything is somebody's beloved something, right? And when times are tough, private entities need to, they pull back, they have to spend less, they let people go. The government, what I worry, doesn't have that same, because they can always they can print more money, they can raise more revenue. They're not subject to those same market forces when times are tough. And which is why every agency, they'll complain about getting cuts when really it's a reduction in how much more money they're going to get this year. They rarely ever do they face a cut.
Yeah, well, let's be clear about what we have been talking about, though, which is cutting the jobs of the federal civil service. And you have to set that into context for how much of the budget it actually covers, right? So if you cut 2.4 million federal employees. That's still 4.3% of the entire federal budget. So what I think is actually happening here is that we are distracting from some of these other issues. And just as you and I've talked about a lot, it's not what they're doing, wanting to reduce the overall spend from the federal government. It's how they're doing it. And they're vilifying federal civil service employees as if they're the problem when they've actually committed decades of their lives, many of them, to nothing but service of the American people.
Well, we debate. Let us know what you think. Up next, why the former head of the ACLU is arguing for free speech always, even for Nazis. We'll discuss. Stay tuned.